ornament. You will also be entered into a drawing at the end of the week for a Bose Smart speaker and donated by Dave and Janet Schmidt, owners of Dave's Auto Repair, and a possibility of winning 2 different sets of hand towels that are custom embroidered with Divine Mercy logo donated by John and Lisa Flynn. They're the owners of Gone Logo here in Hayes, and those are 5 towels for each set. A handmade ladder rosary donated by Dora Liker of Munger. I use mine every single day. I won it many, many years ago, and it's still beautiful, and I love it. A chance at winning a $100 gift certificate to Hickok Steakhouse. That's donated by Oscar Runyon, Greg Whitehair, and Damon Hoare, who are the owners. They're the ones who feed us every day also. It is wonderful food. Divine Mercy Radio shirt for either a man or a woman, and there's one that's given away for each, and you get to pick your size and logo. If you give $500 or more, you get entered into that drawing. You get that ornament, and you get a 60-second spot celebrating a loved one's birthday, an anniversary of a death, a baptism, wedding, graduation, or anything else pretty much that you want us to help you celebrate. If you give $1,000 or more, you get entered into the drawing. You get the $500 60-second spot. You get the ceramic Divine Mercy Radio Nativity ornament, and you get a Divine Mercy Radio bamboo cutting board just in time for Christmas. I've seen them, and one of the local guys who works for Phoenix Cabinet, he has engraved them for us, and it's got a really cool thing on it. It's got that logo on there, and it's very neat. And so you can get one of those. You also receive 2 tickets to the annual banquet, which will be held on Saturday, September 13th in Hayes, and Sunday, September 14th in Salina. Our guest speaker will be the host of Beacon of Truth, and that is Deacon Harold Burke Sivers. If you know him, that guy always comes with energy. If you give now, give $1,000 or more. Those are the prizes that you can get entered into and the things that you will get. But more importantly, you're going to help save souls. 785-621-4110. You are listening to Divine Mercy Radio, 101.7 KJDM, Lindsborg, Salina, 105.7 KMDG Hayes, 88.1 KRTT Great Bend, 88.1 KVDM Hayes, and 89.1 KGOH Colby. All right, we are getting ready to bring in a heavy hitter. Woo-wee. We've got someone special in here. It's Father Nick. All right, was that a good enough introduction?
That was more than I was
expecting. Was that a little bit over the top there?
I like it.
All right. So we've got Father Nick Parker coming in here. Father Nick has been a priest for 16 years and served in 6 parishes before becoming the pastor at Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish here in Hayes. He's a priest, a concert pianist, a doctor of theology, and now he's recently completed the remodeling of Immaculate Heart of Mary Parish in Hayes. You can generally say he's a jack of all trades. Wow, so you remodeled that all by yourself. That's a lot of work.
All by myself.
It's great to have you in here, Father.
Thanks. No, it was not all by myself. I had lots of help.
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually going to let Father read the question. I always have to tell you, don't read the answer. I did that once and messed it all up. So I'm going to let Father Nick read the question. If you think you know the answer to this, call 785-621-4110, and we will get you entered into that drawing for a $50 gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts later today. All right. We're going to let Father read it twice and the selections twice.
Okay. So the question is, why did Padre Pio cover his hands? A, his hands got cold from living up high in the mountains. B, he worked with tools that would hurt his hands. C, he had the stigmata. Or D, the covering of the hands is required for his religious order. So once again, why did Padre Pio cover his hands? Was it A, his hands got cold from living up high in the mountains? B, he worked with tools that would hurt his hands? C, he had the stigmata? Or D, the covering of the hands is required for his religious order?
Whoever writes those questions must do a pretty good job. Is that Michael? We'll find out. That might be Michael. I mean, because you could say, well, yeah, that's maybe his hands are just getting torn up, or well, maybe there's something about religious orders I don't know, or
I know people who cover their hands because they're cold.
Yeah, I do too.
Mm-hmm.
All
Yep.
right. If you think you know the answer to that, before Father Nick and I carry on for too much longer, 785-621-4110. That's 785-621-4110. All right, here we go. Father Nick, what are we talking about today?
Well, the title of the topic is The Path to Joy through St. Thomas Aquinas' Theology of Beauty.
Ooh, boy. You know how St. Thomas said that the Summa was like for beginners?
Yeah, yes.
Is that what you're going to do to us?
Yeah, this is a summary. It is a summary.
A summary of a summary.
Yes.
That's kind of like, I'm kind of the Cliff Notes guy. Like, okay, can you sum this up for me? And then sum it up again.
Yeah,
all
that's
right.
what we'll do today.
All right. So where do you want to start us off here talking on St. Thomas Aquinas' Theology of Beauty?
Well, let's just first of all talk about how of a difficult topic it is in this day and age, just because there are so many opinions about what beauty is. People say, well, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so they'll say, well, then how do you define it then? If it's in the eye of the beholder, can it be defined? And if it can't be defined, does that mean that everything is beautiful? Or does that mean that if everything is beautiful, is nothing beautiful? Like, how can you actually talk about beauty if there really is no real objective truth to it? But the thing is, if beauty is, I think where we need to start is that if beauty is such a subjective thing, if it's such a thing of opinion, then why is there so much agreement on certain things about beauty? I mean, if you give somebody the an image of a bloomed rose and ask them is beautiful, I would say that probably 98% of people would say yes, that is beautiful. But if you show people an image of times of war or violence or something like that, and you say, is this beautiful? They'd probably say, no, that's not beautiful. Well, if there's so much agreement in certain matters, then there has to be some sort of objective truth. There has to be some sort of reason behind that. And so that's kind of what we're going to do, is we're going to start with the premise that there has to be some sort of truth behind what makes something beautiful and what makes something not beautiful. And because there has to be some sort of truth, then it's not just a subjective or opinionated thing. And so we're going to try to figure out, well, what is beauty? How do we define it? And how do we determine it?
Oh, fantastic. I am so ready and so jazzed for this because I agree. And one of the things that I was thinking of as you were talking was, I don't remember who it was, but there was a famous convert who his path to the Catholic Church was actually through beauty, because he remembered walking into cathedrals and going, wait a minute, if Catholics got it wrong, how did they get beauty so right? And so I'm not saying that that was the only thing, but that was the catalyst that he was like, wait a minute, maybe if they got beauty so right, maybe there are other things. And that's what started his journey. And then he became Catholic. And so, as you're saying, this isn't just kind of like you started with like superheroes. Well, if everybody's a superhero, then nobody's a superhero. If everything is beautiful, then nothing is beautiful, because there's no transcendent quality to it. So how do we get to that then? The understanding of it's not just an opinion. How do we really define what beauty is?
Yes. So that's kind of what we're going to try to do, is we're going to try to define it. And the easiest way is just to say, well, what does St. Thomas Aquinas say, and go with that. Because he was smart. We're going to go with that. But, he has a reason for everything he says as well. So let's start then with Thomas Aquinas's definition of beauty and see if it makes sense. So he says that we call a thing beautiful when it shows a clear revelation of its ontological reality. So,
There you go.
any questions?
Big words.
No, but let me just read that again. We're going to try to break that down a little bit. So he says, we call a thing beautiful when it shows a clear revelation of its ontological reality. Let's start by just talking about what an ontological reality is, because those are probably the biggest words in this whole thing. Well, ontology is the study of being, or the study of existence. It comes from the word ontos in Greek. And so when we talk about the ontology of a thing, it means that it basically it has an essence, it has a purpose. So the ontology of a table is table. It has the four legs, it has a top on it, it just has the essence of tableness. The ontology of a bird is that it's got feathers, it normally flies, it has the two little peg legs or whatever you call it. So it has the birdness, as the quality of a birdness. So basically that's what an ontological reality is it portrays its essence, it portrays its reality. All right. So Aquinas would say that a thing is beautiful when it shows a clear revelation of this. So when you can see it and it reveals itself, just in essence, by itself. So you don't have to look at the bird and say, well, what is that? You can look at it and it reveals itself as a bird. And so because it reveals itself as a bird, that is a beautiful bird. The rose example that we gave, you look at it and you say, yes, that is a fully bloomed rose. And so therefore you know that it is a beautiful rose. So that's kind of what he says is what a beautiful thing is it makes itself known. It makes its existence known. And that's how you know that a thing is truly beautiful.
That does help a lot to get us started out really quickly. I want to thank Gilbert and Lorraine Brungart of Hayes. They pledged $1,000. So that is a $2,000 pledge because of our matching funds. Thank you so much, Gilbert and Lorraine. I also love that anytime we have a priest in here, all of a sudden the donations just start flooding in. So just keep it coming. I guess maybe we should just bring a priest in every hour.
We need to find more priests.
We need to find more priests. Yeah. So maybe that's a call for vocations. So,
it is.
No, thank you very much, Gilbert and Lorraine. We really appreciate it. And thank you for helping us to use up some of those matching funds and spread the joy of the gospel. Please join with Gilbert and Lorraine and call in to 785-621-4110. That's 785-621-4110 to make your pledge today. If you're listening and you've never pledged before, this is a great time to do it. 785-621-4110. We're talking with Father Nick Parker. He's helping us to break down to St. Thomas Aquinas's definition of beauty. I also want to congratulate Ginny Augustine. She was a trivia winner. And the question was, what did Padre Pio cover? Why did Padre Pio cover his hands? And it was because he had the stigmata. Maybe we'll have a thing on the stigmata sometime, Father, and you can come do that. Okay. But as for right now, we'll get back to Father has been talking about ontology of things, which means the study of the being. And so just a quick recap, that would be like Father said, if we looked at a flower, we could tell it was a flower. Kind of like, maybe the thing that would confuse people is like when we look at a platypus and we're like, wait, is that a mammal or not?
Yeah. Or, and one of the examples I use is like with a dog. Like you can, and part of the reason why this is on my mind is because we just had Thanksgiving, and after the Thanksgiving parade, there's always the dog show. And they have to judge which is the most beautiful dog in a sense, But have you ever seen like pictures of the world's ugliest dog?
No.
People don't know if it's a dog.
And so it's that bad.
It's that bad. And so, of course, some people are going to say, well, it's beautiful in its own way. Sure. But it's not going to win any dog shows.
No, it's not.
So, because it doesn't portray its dogness. You don't see the full essence of what a dog should be in the world's ugliest dog. So,
right.
Yeah.
That helps us then. All right. So ontology really just means that you can tell what its being is.
Yes, ontology is the study of being, and something is beautiful when it reveals its being.
Okay. That makes
Mhm.
sense. Well, and even our world today, it wouldn't make sense. And now I may not agree that it is the most beautiful person in the world or not, but we have all those magazines that do that. Oh, here's the most handsome man. Here's the most beautiful. Well, yeah. If so, that even in our secular world is admitting to the fact that there is some status out there. There is something that's pointing outside of itself, saying, no, this is a level of beauty.
Mhm. Yeah, but that's also a really good example, because when we are trying to come up with the truth of beauty, let's use the example of the supermodel on the magazine and Mother Teresa.
Oh,
Which is more beautiful and why?
oh, gotcha.
Or let's take the movie star who's always on the big screen and John Paul II. One is, probably a lot we would say is more beautiful than the other, but why?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we're trying to get at is what is the true meaning of their being, and are they living up to it?
Oh, very good. So yeah, not just looking at external pleasure, but actually is their being showing forth what it was originally created for.
Exactly.
Oh man,
Exactly.
that's deep, Father.
Mhm.
All right. Well, let's dig some more into it.
Okay,
Then.
let's do. So with this, Aquinas is going to go on to basically say that there are three categories that you want to look at when you are determining beauty, if something is beautiful. And for each of these, I'll probably use the example of the dog again, just because
Okay.
it's easiest. But the first one that he says, the first element for beauty is what he calls claritas. Think of clarity. And so therefore it's clarity of being. In other words, you don't have to ask, what is it?
Okay.
So basically, the dog looks like a dog,
Gotcha.
right? It's not like the ugliest dog in the world where you're wondering, is it a dog? You can see that it is a dog. And like those dog shows where they're trying to show which is the most beautiful dog. Each of those dogs there are in the running because they look like the epitome of what their breed should look like. So that's the first part is the claritas. Does it have clarity of being? So after you have clarity of being, the second element is what he calls veritas, which veritas literally means truth, but it also can mean wholeness. So wholeness of being. Basically, are all the parts there? So when you look at a dog is supposed to have four legs, and it's supposed to have a tail, and it's supposed to have a nose, and it's supposed to have its ears and its teeth and all that stuff. Is it all there? And if it's not all there, well then it's not going to probably win the dog show for the most beautiful dog. You're probably not going to see a three-legged dog in the running for that. A dog that's lost all of its teeth, probably not in the running for the most beautiful dog. The ugliest dog in the world is like missing half of its hair, so it's probably not going to be considered the most beautiful dog. So you have to have all of those elements there, and that's what the veritas is the wholeness of being. All right.
Okay.
So the first thing, claritas, you don't have to ask what is it. Second part, veritas, all of its parts are there. And the third part is what he calls consonantia, which means harmonious arrangement. Basically, everything is in its proper place. So you're not going to have a dog that has a leg coming out of its back, and it's not going to have a tail coming out of its forehead. Everything is in its proper place. And once you have everything in its proper place, then that's going to make it truly beautiful. So then you have those three elements again: claritas, clarity. You don't have to ask what is it. Second, veritas, wholeness of being. All of its parts are there. And the third part is consonantia. Everything is in its proper place and in its proper order.
Oh man. So there are so many ways that we could take this.
We could.
Because we're now talking about, especially when it comes to humanity. humanity's going to be on a different plane then, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Because we could look at a dog and be like, no, that's an ugly dog.
Right.
Because dog doesn't have personhood. We could look at a painting and say, oh, that's a beautiful painting, just for the pleasure of the eyes, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But when we start to talk about people, there's something different about person.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hold that thought for just a second. Man, we might need another hour. So hold that thought for just a second. If you're listening to us, we're talking to Father Nick Parker, and we're talking about the path to joy through St. Thomas Aquinas's theology of beauty. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Joy of the Gospel. We are on our fall Care-a-thon, and we're asking you to partner with us in spreading the joy of the gospel out there by sending in your donations. Call to 785-621-4110. We do still have plenty of those matching funds left. So when you call in, just like Gilbert and Lorraine did a little while ago, their $1,000 donation became a $2,000 donation. So we have those other donors who want to put their money to work along with yours and double your donation. Please let them to work with you. 785-621-4110. All right, let's get back into talking about it then, Father Nick. So you just talked to us about beauty must have clarity, wholeness, and harmonious arrangement. So like you said, a dog should not have a leg sticking out of its back.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
You should know that it's a dog. It should have all the necessary elements that you need for a dog, and all those elements should be in their proper place.
Okay, so now where do we head?
Well, you wanted to talk a little bit about humanity. We could talk a little bit, go back to the examples that we had before. Kind of going off script here, but it's kind of fun.
That's okay.
Because we did talk a little bit about how, our society has this epitome of an image of what should be beautiful. And a lot of that is going to be, whatever is closest to the Barbie doll that can ever exist, that sort of a thing. But then we asked the question, well, what's more beautiful, the model on the cover of a magazine or Mother Teresa, and why? What is more beautiful, the famous movie actor or John Paul II, and why? Well, let's look at what a human is. A human is first and foremost created by God, and then also created for God. Everything else kind of comes secondary. And of course, there's the physical and spiritual aspect of the human. Someone is not going to be physically beautiful if they are, if first of all, they don't look like a human, if they don't have all the necessary elements of a human, and those elements are not in the right place. But when you look at how we are primarily made by God and for God, well, then we can see how everything else is just sort of going to just not have as much importance. Mother Teresa is not going to win any beauty pageants. And I don't think she'd be offended by anyone saying that.
No, I don't think she would.
But she knew absolutely that she was made by God. And therefore she lived for God. And because then her very being, the way that she lived, just sort of proclaimed that. If we want to use our definition earlier, it revealed her ontological reality.
Yeah.
That's what made her so beautiful. She revealed who she was as one created by God and created for God. Same thing with John Paul II. He, once again, is probably not going to be the superstar on the big screen, but he knew that he was created by God and created for God. And because he lived according to that reality of what it means to be human, when you live according to your reality, that's what makes something beautiful.
Wow. Because that then really, especially when we're talking about our humanity, it takes us away from looking at others as are they aesthetically pleasing?
Right.
And you're starting to look at, like, as you were saying, ontologically, we're not just a shell. And so when you can look past just the aesthetics of someone and see their very being and know, wow, that person is living out humanness,
Yes.
then that's when you can say that's a beautiful person. I mean, on one hand, yes, you could be like, wow, she's really pretty. And
Yeah.
you may not be wrong. But to say someone is beautiful, then would more be speaking to their showing forth of their human self.
Yes. And we can even go another step then with that, because um, we also want to look at what happens when something is not beautiful versus when something is truly beautiful. Aquinas would say, we talked about those three elements of having clarity of being, having wholeness of being, and everything being in its right place. Aquinas would say that if, let's say, 2 out of the 3 of those elements are present, then it would still be pleasing. And so he doesn't deny that it's still something that is attractive, but it has to have all 3 elements for it to be beautiful. So when you see like the person going down the street and you say, wow, that's a beautiful person there, you might be right that person is physically beautiful, but in reality, it's more accurate to say that person is pleasing to the eye.
Yeah.
Physically, they're pleasing to the eye. You don't know if they are truly beautiful unless you see how they are living the fullness of their life.
Yeah. And I think maybe as you're saying that, one thing that I'm thinking of is we could look at somebody. Let's just take, it's easy to pick on Hollywood, but let's take an actor or an actress who is pleasing to the eye. And maybe you don't know anything about it, but then you find out that actually behind the scenes, they live a really disgusting life. They are no longer then beautiful because they're not living out their humanity as they were called to. They may still be aesthetically pleasing, like we said, but the beauty of their humanity is not there like it should be. Does that make sense? Or?
Absolutely. And you can still acknowledge the good there. You can still acknowledge that they might have what people would consider to be physically pleasing. You can still acknowledge that they might have great talents as an actor. You might still like their movies. We're not going to deny any of that.
Yep.
But as far as a beautiful person, you need all of that, the physical, the spiritual, and also everything in its right order. That last part, the consonantia, the harmonious arrangement, that one, it can sometimes be the most challenging in a person's life, because it means, do you have a prayer life? Is the prayer life in its proper place in your day? Do you have a proper diet? Is the diet in its proper place during the day? Do you have a life that is dedicated to charity for others? And is that in its proper place throughout the day or throughout the week? Just making sure that you have all of those necessary elements and that they are all in their proper place. We're probably all going to be striving for that for the rest of our lives.
I was going to say, is anybody else feeling a little bit ugly right now?
Yeah, we all feel really ugly.
Great, Father. We're talking about joy. Way to make it. No, we are going to get back to that because that is really good for us. I am loving this conversation. It's helping me to open up understanding, a greater understanding of the beauty of the human person. So I want to get right back to that after I thank Mel and Ginny Augustine. They pledged $125, and that is on top of their monthly donation. So thank you so very much for that, because that is a $250 donation. Janice Collins donated $500 in addition to her monthly pledge. So that's $1,000 then that's on top of what she normally pledges. So thank you, Mel and Jenny. Thank you, Janice. We really appreciate it. Join with Mel and Jenny and Janice, myself, and all others who want to keep getting the joy out there. We're having an amazing conversation here with Father Nick Parker. And so please stay tuned. Please keep calling in 785-621-4110. That's 785-621-4110. We want to get right back to this and learn a little bit more about St. Thomas Aquinas's theology of beauty. So we'll break back in a few minutes for a question, but we're going to make people be patient. So where do you want to go from here, Father?
Well, let's then talk about, since we are talking about the joy of the gospel throughout this theme, let's talk about the result of what happens when something is beautiful.
Okay.
Because Thomas Aquinas does specify that when something is beautiful, that the result of that is joy. He does say that it is joy that it brings a person. With that, think about, for example, when you are walking along and you see a beautiful flower. It's something that makes you happy. It's something that makes you smile. If you're in an art museum and you see a beautiful piece of art, it is something that people feel is very enriching. It kind of gives them a little bit more life, a little bit more vibrancy. It gives them that joy. And granted, not all art is happy. let's make sure that's clear, that we make a difference between beautiful and happy. But it still is going to instill some form of joy in the person. One of the examples I like to use, and this is a pretty extreme one, so I apologize for it, but the movie Schindler's List is one of the most dramatic movies I think I've ever seen in my life. And it really shows the horrors of World War II and what happened during that time. But that is an absolutely beautiful work of art. And after one sees it, just by acknowledging the truth of the horrors that happened, as well as the kind of the hidden victories of those who lived through it, when people see truth revealed, and when they see realities being given to people as they are, even though there's still that sadness and the mourning over the horrors that have happened, there still is a little bit of the person that says, but that still is enriching us, that's changing us, that's making us better, which is kind of that hint of if we can say, a supernatural joy, even in the midst of that darkness.
Wow, that made me think of the Pietà.
Absolutely.
Oh,
that would where we
goodness.
go. That's exactly where we'd go. Keep going with that.
Well, while you were speaking about that, I mean, about to tear up here a little bit, because you're right that so it is a beautiful sculpture, but you look at it, and especially if you know what is behind that, I mean, you're thinking about Mary holding her dead son, and his body is lifeless. You can tell that. And that is a moment of great sorrow and agony and pain. And yet in that, there's the beauty of the resurrection. And so like when you were speaking about that, I'm like, oh my goodness, I get what you're saying.
And there's a supernatural joy that comes from the realization of the great sorrow and anguish that Mary felt and the great suffering that Jesus went through, that is hard to explain, but those who have experienced it have experienced it. And they know that has given their lives more fulfillment and more joy because of that beauty.
Wow. There is so much to talk about here. Sit and soak that in, folks, for just a little bit. Oh my goodness. I almost don't want to have to break for this, but I know people do like the trivia questions. So we will do you want to read this one again?
I could if you want me to.
Okay,
sure.
So we'll get the second trivia question here, but then our conversation is too good. We got to get right back to it. I'm going to let Father Nick read the second question. Call in to 785-621-4110. That's 785-621-4110. Here's your question.
Okay, so what was the ascension? Mary going to heaven, B, Elijah being taken up to heaven, C, Jesus going back to heaven, or D, Saint Joseph going up to heaven after his death? So once again, what was the ascension? Was it A, Mary going into heaven, B, Elijah being taken up to heaven, C, Jesus going back to heaven, or D, Saint Joseph going up to heaven after his death?
785-621-4110. We're talking with Father Nick Parker, and he's helping us to understand St. Thomas Aquinas' theology of beauty. We just got done speaking about something that I think is very profound, that you were saying that you can look at some things, and although not everything is going to make us have that sense of happiness, even within the sense of pain, sometimes there can be beauty within it. So where can you take us from there, Father?
Well, I I think that kind of just speaks a lot in itself. I mean, you mentioned the image of the Pietà, how the crucifix can be beautiful, how the
Mhm.
sorrowful mysteries can be beautiful, the seven sorrows of Mary can be beautiful, because it ultimately does bring us joy. It does bring us that fulfillment in life, as a whole. Um, so with that, the next example that I was hoping to talk about today would be the example of the beauty of a church and what makes churches beautiful, mainly because that's been on my mind lately.
I wonder why, Father.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of people know that we just finished, and I don't know what to call it. If it's a remodel, it's not really a remodel. It's not really a renovation. It's not really. It's more of a completion of.
Mhm.
I think that's probably the best word. A completion of Immaculate Heart of Mary here in Hayes, and I think it's good to apply this a little bit to the buildings of churches, because there's a lot that can go into that as well. Um, it's interesting how today a lot of churches, a lot of modern churches, it seems, have kind of fallen away from what beauty is.
Mhm.
And I hate to say that as a critique, but I think it's real. Um,
I agree.
that, sometimes churches look like banks and banks start looking like churches. And I think that we all have driven by the mega churches that look more like shopping malls or rec centers than they look like churches,
Mhm.
And so this is something that's important to apply to this category as well, because it does have a great impact on our faith as a whole.
Yeah, and I think the reason that is I'm going to tell you in a minute. First, I'm going to break in and congratulate Linda Becker, who is our trivia winner. Thank you for listening and calling in, Linda. The question was, what was the ascension? And that is when Jesus goes up into heaven. So congratulations on that. We'll get you entered into that drawing for that $50 gift certificate to Messenger Traditional Catholic Books and Gifts later today. If you're listening and you would like to partner with us in sharing the gospel, please call in right now to 785-621-4110. Okay, Father. So as you were talking, definitely agree 100%, because if you walk in, now obviously the most beautiful thing in a Catholic church is going to be Christ in the Eucharist. But also there are things that when we make churches according to real beauty, that helps us then to draw out of ourselves and to look toward the absolute bar of beautiness, I guess I could say.
Absolutely. So let's keep in mind what a church is, because at the beginning we talked about ontological reality, right?
Mhm.
Ontology, the studying of being. So what is
Churchness.
churchness? Yeah. What is the essence of a church? Well, the church is God's house, right? Which is where then we are supposed to encounter God. We are supposed to encounter the divine. It's supposed to be that taste of heaven. If the church doesn't help you to encounter God, encounter the divine, and encounter heaven in both a physical and spiritual way, then is it really fulfilling its role as a church? And we have to have it physical and spiritual, because we are humans.
Mhm.
We are physical and spiritual. And so because we are physical and spiritual, we need the physical and spiritual
Yeah.
for our wholeness of life. This is also why all the sacraments are physical as well.
Yes, absolutely. So when we're looking at that, then you said when we're looking at churchness, you said it should be an encounter of the divine. And, you would find people that would be like, well, the church is not a building. Well, yes, on one hand, you're right.
That's
Because
one definition
the
of a
body
church.
of Christ, yes, you're right, is the people who make up the body of Christ. But also, yeah, there can be more than one definition, as you just said, for a thing. And when we're talking about the physical structure itself, I love that you're bringing in the ontology of it. Because if we were just to say a church is just a building where people can come together, okay, there's lots of those. But if we're going to say a church is a house of God, then how does it live up to its churchness? So can you help us understand that even better?
Sure. Well, let's go through those three elements that we talked about with Aquinas, that make up something that's beautiful. The first one was the claritas, or clarity of being. Does it look like a church? Just
Woo.
simply put, if I walked by this building that was basically a giant shed,
Mhm.
I would not think that that's a church. In fact, I would hope that it would be used as a shed,
Yeah.
you know. But if I walked by, let's say, something that looked like St. Peter's in Rome, I would really hope that that's St. Peter's in Rome and not like some sort of a restaurant that somebody built.
Yeah, and in fact, you'd be really disappointed if you were on the outside and you're like, "Look at the beauty of the," and you walk in and yeah, it's a McDonald's and you're like, "What?
Exactly.
Something ain't right here."
Exactly. That's not a beautiful McDonald's, nor is it a beautiful church.
No, it's a mess.
It's a mess. That's right. It is a beautiful mess. Yeah. But that's the first thing, is that it has to look like a church. And
Okay.
churches are so powerful for evangelization too. If you don't have something that looks like a church, how do you expect the person who doesn't know this to ever walk in?
Yeah.
You know, you need something that proclaims this is where you can encounter the divine, if you want those who have not encountered the divine to come in and encounter the divine.
Wow.
So that's the first thing. Claritas, it has to look like a church.
Okay.
Veritas, meaning truthfulness or wholeness of being, meaning everything is there. So then let's say, yes, it looks like a church, but then you walk in and you don't see an altar, and you don't see a tabernacle, and you don't see a crucifix, and there's really no defined area of the sanctuary, and they have a few chairs set up, but there's really no pews. Well, you're going to question whether or not you're even in a church again.
Mhm.
You know, so you have to have all those things present. You have to have the tabernacle, you have to have the altar, you have to have the sanctuary, you have to have the crucifix, and then you have to have other things that help foster prayer and foster devotion as well, because that's all important in a person's spiritual life. And so there are certain things that people look for when they go into a Catholic church. They want to see statues and candles, and they want to see windows that have images that help them to understand their faith. All of these things really come together and are very important in order to help foster the faith.
Oh, very good. Because I can see where this is going to go now, because as you talked, as we're going back to the ontology of things, and it needs to have harmonious arrangement.
Harmonious arrangement, everything in its right place.
Yeah.
Initially, we use the example of a dog, that you don't want the leg coming out of its back, and you want the tail coming out of its forehead. That would be an ugly dog.
Mm-hmm.
Likewise, if you go into a Catholic church and you see the altar clear off to the side, and you see the crucifix hung somewhere in a corner, and you don't know where the tabernacle is, you don't see that anywhere, and you can't find that, and you have to ask somebody where the tabernacle is, and you
Mhm.
find out that's in a side closet. That's a really sad church.
Yeah.
You know, but everything has to be in its proper place. You want the tabernacle in a very prominent place where it's easy to find, where
Mhm.
people can be attracted to it as soon as they go in. You want the altar to be in the center of the sanctuary, so that that becomes the focal point of worship. You want to have the ambo not in front of the altar, because that would not be a proper place,
Uh-huh.
but to the side, and maybe even a little bit behind, so that people understand that this is an important place, but not as important as the altar. And therefore, when you go in and you see the crucifix in a prominent spot, either next to the altar or behind the altar, when everything is then put in its proper place, then we get everything in its proper arrangement. And there's actually a long tradition about this as well in churches, that traditionally items of devotion are to be in the back of churches. So, like certain saint statues,
Okay.
candles that people light are supposed to be in the back. As you start walking into the church, that's when you go into more historical things. So that's why a lot of stained glass windows will depict certain images of the life of Christ, or things that had happened in sometime in the lives of the saints. So as you go into the church, it's going to be more historical. And then when you get into the sanctuary is supposed to be heavenly images. So if you have images of saints around the sanctuary, they're supposed to be depicted in their heavenly glory, not as if they were on earth, but as they would be seen in heaven. And artwork is supposed to oftentimes be of a heavenly image as well, because that's where heaven and earth really unite. That's where it is, in that sanctuary. And so it's supposed to have these heavenly realities depicted in the sanctuary.
Wow, that makes a lot of sense, and especially when we're talking about the Catholic Church. So this is part of why I love our Catholic faith so much, is because the unity of things. And even the church does. You could tell me because you have a doctorate in this, but there obviously there's a lot of freedom with things, but there also is, like you were saying, like the tabernacle is supposed to be in a prominent, easily recognizable space, correct? Unless
Yes.
it's like impossible to do that. You're supposed to be able to walk in and be like, oh, there's Jesus.
Absolutely. Now, there are some places, and one of the best examples I have of this is the Cathedral Basilica in St. Louis. You walk into that, and it's absolutely gorgeous, but you're not going to find the tabernacle right away. It is in a very nice chapel off to the side. But the reason for that is that because there are certain places that are sort of like pilgrimage sites, and a lot of people come and visit.
Yep.
They wanted a place where people could still pray to Christ in the tabernacle without being interrupted by the noise and the hubbub going on around them.
Yeah.
And so there are places where they will have the tabernacle off to the side in order for those people to continue to be able to foster their devotions.
Yeah, and I could say from my own personal experience too. Now, the mass ended up being legitimate, and I won't say where it was at, but we walked in one time, my wife and I, to go to mass somewhere, and there's this giant crystal cross in the middle of this area. There aren't pews, and it's not that you don't have to have pew, but everything was just kind of set up in a mess with just these regular chairs and stuff. And both my wife and I look at each other like, when we looked this up online, we were pretty sure it was Catholic, but we sat there the whole time waiting for mass to start to actually make sure that we were at a Catholic parish. And that's kind of what you're talking about. It was one of those where it did not have harmonious arrangement. When we walked in, we're like, I thought this was a Catholic church. And we were almost ready to walk out because we just weren't sure, like, where are we at?
Sure. And that's also a really good point, is that when you have something that's beautiful, it's inviting, it draws people in, and it makes people have a sense of comfort as well. So when you walk into a beautiful church, it's like, yeah, this feels right. This feels comfortable. This feels like home.
Yeah.
When you walk into another building and you have to say, well, am I supposed to sit in this chair? Am I supposed to be, then am I supposed to be focusing in this direction? Are we at the right spot? The more you go outside of what is supposed to be, of what its ontological reality is, the more people are going to have to feel very uncomfortable until they see it start, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, it's legitimate, but it's still not.
Yeah, I'm not sure here.
I am not sure here. Right.
Yeah.
And once again, there's a great evangelization in that when we build things that are beautiful, it will draw people in. When we build things that are creative in our own minds, but we're trying to think outside the box, but it's really not according to what is truthfully beautiful.
Yeah.
This isn't a matter of opinion. When we build things that are truthfully, when we don't build things that are truthfully beautiful, it will actually make people deter from it.
Yeah.
It turns people away.
Yeah. So now, how all this that we've been talking about, how do we apply that to, like, especially with Immaculate Heart now and the completion of it?
Well, I am biased, but I do love our church because our church, it had always been planned from the time it was built to be painted and to have stained glass windows put in the upper part of it. And so there were always ideas that they would do something. They never actually knew what, but they always knew that there needed to be something in there. And so they built basically the structure that had all the potential in order to be as beautiful as they could imagine it or want it to be.
Yeah.
And so now when you walk in, the first thing you do is your eyes are sort of drawn up to the ceiling, because there's a lot of things on the images on the ceiling. We have stars on the ceiling, because we want people's eyes to be drawn up to heaven. And that's the first thing that you want when someone goes into a church, is you want them to lift their eyes to heaven just naturally. With that, then we have our devotional statues in the back with our candles in the back, because in a church, devotion is in the back. And then you go historically as you go through the rest of the church. So the further in you go, the more you will go into historical images. And that's why on the ceiling of Immaculate Heart of Mary now we have images from the life of Mary that depict sort of her history.
Mhm.
But of course, you can't have Mary without Christ. So we'll have an image of Mary as the Mother of God with Jesus there. The Holy Family with Jesus present. The presentation, Jesus is there. We have her at the crucifixion and have her at Pentecost, and Jesus crowning her with her coronation. So it really has that great tie of how she leads us to Christ through the historical events of her life. But then in the sanctuary is where you are moving then from historical to heavenly. And so we have Mary depicted in our dome in her heavenly glory. She's got the clouds around her. She has 12 stars around her, depicted as from the book of Revelation. There's a lot more elements to her, the gold behind her, and she's radiating these silver beams. But then we just sort of have this focus then on heaven there. And then the tabernacle right behind the altar has this gold stenciling of these vines and these branches, and it's the only place in the entire church where you find this design, because it is highlighting basically the reality of what is in the tabernacle.
Oh, wow.
That Jesus is the vine, we are the branches. He is the fruit of the vine. And it also, there's little elements in there that also depict that pay homage to the sacrifice of Christ as well. But it really just highlights the true presence of Christ right in the very center of our sanctuary.
That is absolutely awesome. You are listening to Father Nick Parker. He's talking about, we ended up talking about the completion of IHM here, but what we're really discussing is St. Thomas Aquinas's theology of beauty, understanding what that means, understanding the inherent qualities of beauty and what they really are, and how we can actually judge something according to a real standard and not just leave it up to, well, everybody gets to say for their own. And if you've been enjoying this talk, which I very much have, it is happening because of people like you who are listening and who have donated to this radio station. And we have these 5 stations that we have up and going, thanks to the blessing of God and thanks to all of you wonderful people. So if you're hearing me now, please join with us. We are having our fall Care-a-thon, which helps us to secure those funds that we need to make sure that this mission continues, the mission of spreading the joy of the gospel. Please call in right now to 785-621-4110. That's 785-621-4110 to give us your pledge and to help us to continue this mission. All right, Father Nick, we do have a little bit of time left, and I want you to be able to speak to it as much as you can. I think we've answered a lot of it already, but what if somebody was to say, we can worship God without spending all this money, and couldn't money be spent better than, like wasting it on all this paint and stuff like that?
Yeah. And I would say that's actually a legitimate question. It's actually a really good question. Because we know that there are poor in the world. We know that there are needy in the world, and we absolutely should not neglect them as a church. But we have to keep in mind that we are a both and people. And that, yes, we absolutely care for the poor, but not at the expense of taking away what is going to help the rich, the poor, the needy, all of those that are in need of their spiritual welfare. And that's another thing that we also have to keep in mind, that the primary goal of the church is not to care for the temporal welfare of the people while on earth. The primary goal of the church is to care for the eternal welfare
Yeah.
and get souls to heaven, which granted, helping the poor is a major way that we do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But we need to care for the spiritual life of all people. And so with that, we look at the scriptures, and we look at how the scriptures always said that you have to care for the needy, the widows, the orphan, the foreigner. But at the same time, in the midst of that, God is never displeased by the sacrifices made to glorify him. Think about how the Israelites in the desert, who had no source of income, were called to give everything they had in order to build a meeting tent for God.
Yep.
And then think about how when they were establishing the new country of Israel, absolutely no resources to begin with. But then eventually they did become a wealthy nation. And the first thing that they had to do was build a temple to God.
Yeah.
Using all that they had in order to build this great temple. Yeah, they were supposed to care for the poor as well, but not at the expense of glorifying God.
Yeah, and I think we could say, and why don't we just do both?
Exactly.
Which I think the Catholic Church is really good at.
Absolutely. Care for the poor, but don't do so at the expense of glorifying God. If you sacrifice your glorification of God in the process, you're not fully living out the Catholic life.
Wow. That is beautiful. I want to really quickly, because then I want your final thoughts and help us to close up and your priestly blessing before you leave. But want to thank Dan and Dee Coster for giving $250. That's in addition to their monthly pledge, so that that becomes an extra $500 donation through those matching funds. Thank you so much, Dee and Dan. If you are listening to me, please call in to 785-621-4110 and give us your pledge. But enough of me talking. Back to Father Nick. We only have a couple of minutes here, and I want your final thoughts on this, so that we can really kind of put it all together.
Well, I think the main point that we wanted to get across here today was that beauty is an objective truth. It's not something that is a subjective opinion. And granted, we can have discussions and debates on if something is beautiful or not, but only if we can agree that there has to be a truth behind it. If we can agree that there's a truth behind it, then we can discuss whether or not something is beautiful. But without that premise, it's not going to work. But then we realize that beauty has to reveal its true reality. And when something reveals its true reality, that's what brings us joy. That's what brings us fulfillment. That's what gives us a wholeness of being. So that's basically the summary of all of it.
That is awesome. Thank you so very much for your time in here today. Would you give us your blessing, please?
Sure. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for the time you've given us. We give you thanks for this radio station, the way that it evangelizes to the world. We ask that you might bless all who are listening to this station at this time, all who open their ears to the call of God as well, that they may continue to follow the Lord in all they do, and that through their lives they might glorify you. And may Almighty God bless all who are listening, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen. Father, thank you so much for your time.
Sure, thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
We just got done having an amazing conversation with Father Nick Parker on beauty. Oh my goodness. Go back and listen to that again. Find it on YouTube when it gets posted there, and it will be very much worth your time. Share it with others. And as I'm speaking about sharing this with others, please remember to share the live stream so that we can reach as many people as possible. You know, that's free. All you got to do is go to those sites and click on share, bing, bang, boom. And then other people are going to see that, sharing it on your Facebook feed. It's going to alert other people that you just shared something. They're going to go to your feed. They can see it. They can share it. We can get these out there. And this was such a beautiful thing to be able to talk about beauty itself. So please share that. please make sure you're on your live streams and sharing that with all of your friends and family so that they can see it too. You're listening to Divine Mercy Radio's Fall Care-a-thon, Joy of the Gospel. We're going to start our next hour here in just a little bit, but we're going to take a quick 5-minute break and we will be right back with you. We'll see you here in 5